Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, April 14, 2022. This meeting is being held electronically because of the pandemic and my declaration that it is not, determination that it is not prudent or feasible for us to meet in our boardroom. All votes will be taken by roll call, and we are acting always in accordance with the open meeting law, including the provision 13D.021, which provides for remote meetings in the case of pandemic. We begin by taking the attendance by roll call. Manager Miller.
Here.
Manager Olson. I see you there. That's
Here.
okay. Thank you, Bill. Manager Sandos.
Here.
Manager Loftus.
Here.
Manager Hitchmati.
Here.
Manager Maxwell. Manager Maxwell. Manager
Here.
White is.
Yeah.
Okay, Manager Maxwell, thank you. We not only have a quorum, we have perfect attendance. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda? Seeing no call, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval.
That was Manager Miller. Is
Correct.
there a second?
Second, Hitchmati.
Manager Hedgemati, thank you. Voting on approving the agenda, Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Hedgemati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Sando,
Aye.
Manager Olson, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager White, both aye. The agenda is approved. We have a wonderful thing happening tonight. That is the swearing in of newly reappointed board manager, Bill Olson. Look to Mr. Smith.
Manager Olson, if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, William Olson,
I, William Olson, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of the manager of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to the best of my judgment and ability.
thank you very much. Congratulations.
Manager Olson, congratulations. Ms. Blummer has a new, I'm sorry, Mr. Beck has a new employee introduction this evening, so I'll look to you, Mr. Beck.
Thank you, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight, we want to introduce Kaylee Blommer to the Board of Managers. She's been with the district for about 2 weeks as the research and monitoring field assistant and has been helping us get going on a variety of different field tasks. But beyond giving a lot of background about her, I think I could let her introduce herself to the group. Kaylee.
Blummer. You are muted, however.
Am I good now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so like Brian said, my name is Kaylee Blommer. I graduated from the University of Minnesota this past December in 2021 with my Bachelor's of Science in Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology. So there I got to work at a plant genetics lab. I've also done some work with Conservation Corps and some aquatic invasive species detection work. In my first couple of weeks, I've gotten to construct some groundwater wells for the East Auburn wetland site, and I've gotten to learn about the ResNet project with Marissa, a research and monitoring technician, and help her kind of get some instruments ready for that. And yeah, I'm just excited to do some stream and lake monitoring this summer and just continue to learn about the other projects that are going on at Minnehaha Creek.
Well, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Welcome, Kaylee.
Welcome.
Our next item of business is approval of the minutes of the March 24th, 2022 board meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
I'll take Manager Miller's motion, and was that Manager Hitchmati? I'll take that. as a
Hitchmati,
second.
second.
Okay. Then voting on approving the minutes, Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Sando,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye as well. We can move to the consent items. That was the consent agenda. I'm sorry, I made a mistake there. The remaining items in the consent agenda are Resolution 22017, which is renewing the GIS and whiskey maintenance and license agreements. 22018, authorization to submit the annual report to Bowser and DNR. 2219, which is authorization to extend 5 vegetation maintenance contracts through the 2022 year. And Resolution 22020, which is acceptance of a donation. Is there a motion to approve those consent agenda items?
So moved, Hishmati.
Thank you, Manager Hijmati. Is there a second?
Second, Sando.
Manager Sando, thank you for your second. Voting then on those consent agenda resolutions, Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Sando,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye as well. For my report, this is going to sound very familiar, but Mr. Whisker, Mr. Carlson, and I did meet with Senator Fata from South Minneapolis. This is again part of our talking about the Nokomis white paper, and he is very interested. He wanted to get a copy and to be kept informed of all the public meetings. And in addition, the 3 liaisons have been meeting. The Minneapolis liaisons have been getting briefings from staff as we go along. Manager Loftus, can you give us a report from Operations and Programs Committee?
Yes, thank you, President White. I'll stick with the Minneapolis theme. The agenda item for tonight was the Minnehaha Parkway sub-watershed. It is a continuation of our CIP process, and tonight we focused on Minnehaha Parkway, discussed some project plans, and then a bit about bringing our partners together, the partners being the city of Minneapolis in the Minneapolis Park Board. And like I mentioned, part of the timeline for this topic is the CIP, but also, as you mentioned, the Nokomis white paper, and also the renewal of a MOU with the city that expires in December of 2022. So this item will be forthcoming in our CIP and brought back to the full board with an MOU in the last half of the year. And that was our only agenda item this evening. So that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Are there other events or meetings that managers would like to report on? We will then move to item 10.1, which is permit 22016, Ms. Ernst. And once the staff presentation is over, I'll look for a motion and a second, and then we can open it up for, before I ask for a motion, I'll ask for any public input, then we can ask for a motion and the board can discuss the matter going from there. I know too that we have representatives here from the city of Edina and perhaps others. So if there's an opportunity when you want to speak, we'll look to that. We'll look to you also. So I'll turn this over to you, Ms. Ernst.
All right, just making sure everyone can hear me and see the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. So hello, President White and Board of Managers. So tonight I'm going to be providing a briefing on permit 22-016, the Morningside Flood Risk Reduction Project. This presentation will provide an overview of the project, rule compliance, including downstream impacts and permit conditions. And we'll end tonight's presentation with a discussion to answer any questions about the project's scope, impacts, and partnership. First, I wanted to talk through the project's location. The image on the left shows the watershed district as a whole, and then where the project is located within it. And then the image on the right shows a close-up of the area where the project is happening. And this highlighted area here represents the Morningside neighborhood within the city of Edina. And then these two areas here encircled in red, those represent where the project is actually taken place. And then lastly, I also wanted to call out the Bedema-Cosca stormwater ponds right here, and then Bedema-Cosca. This is where the water from the project flows downstream and it exits into Bedema-Cosca. Next, I wanted to share a drainage and storm sewer map. So again, the project is happening here, and the drainage from the project flows through an existing storm sewer network before flowing through the stormwater ponds and then to Bedema-Cosca. And I'm going to talk through a little bit the project areas. So the first and most upstream project area is the Lynn Kipling area right here. And the main improvements to this area include pond excavation to remove material, and this is going to provide more flood storage space. So the runoff storage capacity is going to increase from 10 acre feet to 20 acre feet, which will provide flood risk reduction for those homes surrounding that area. And then the storm sewer system in this area is also going to be altered by splitting flows. So currently runoff from the Lynn Kipling area only flows through an existing storm sewer network that is north of that area right here. So it flows this way and then bypasses Weber Pond and then heads to Bedema-Cosca. So what the project does, it's proposing a new outlet in the southeast corner, which will take some of those flows, specifically the low flows, and route those toward Weber Pond, which is going to provide additional water quality treatment before it flows downstream again through that existing storm sewer network. And then additionally, the outlet of the northeast corner that's going to be maintained, and then that'll serve to route high flows around Weber Pond during storm events. So the next area where there's work proposed is the Weber Park area. And so that lies between Lynn Kipling area and Weber Pond. Improvements here includes new pedestrian trails, reoriented ball fields, and a stormwater drainage swale. Now moving past the park, I wanted to introduce the Weber Pond expansion. So Weber Pond is currently a stormwater pond of about 3.1 acres. And as part of the project, it's proposed to be expanded to 6.1 acres. And this happens by both excavation in the current ponding area and by also expanding the pond into this northern wooded parcel and making that area deeper. And that excavation and expansion is going to double the storage capacity of the area. So it's going to go from around 50 acre feet to around 100 acre feet of storage. So that'll serve to collect stormwater runoff from the surrounding houses and also provide water quality benefit by allowing for more nutrients and particles from that runoff to settle into the pond before it flows downstream. And then in addition to the pond expansion, they've also proposed some perimeter trails and some boardwalks which will traverse the pond. And in addition to the pond expansion, there's also going to be a pump station added right here. And that's going to pump drainage from the pond northeast along this red line and use the existing storm sewer system. And that pumping is going to take place through 3 different regimes. The first mode is the periodic pumping. So this will happen every day for about 1 to 3 hours, and it will serve to maintain normal water levels below the gravity outlet to compensate for the groundwater inflows. And the second mode is predictive pumping. So this mode will be used in advance of 10-year storms and above, and it will lower the pond by up to 3 feet. And that'll be dependent on weather forecast and the pond water levels. And the whole goal of this predictive pumping is that they'll send water downstream ahead of storms, which will create more storage capacity in order to accept runoff from the surrounding neighborhood. And then the last mode is pumping during and after events. So this will again take place during those larger events, so 10 year and above, and it will serve to manage the water levels. And again, that amount and duration is going to be dependent on National Weather Service forecasts and water levels at Weber Pond. So from here, I wanted to move into the rule analysis that was completed by district staff and engineers. Based on our review, the project complies with all the applicable MCWD standards. The first rule that was triggered was erosion control, and this was due to the proposed disturbance of over 5,000 square feet. So once Edina puts the project out for bid, a requirement of the contractor is going to be design an erosion and sediment control plan, which will be proposed as a condition of approval for the permit. And then the second rule triggered is floodplain alteration, and that's triggered due to the excavation below the high water level of Weber Pond. And as we discussed, the project is proposing a net increase in flood storage capacity, which complies with the rule. And then the last rule triggered is the stormwater management rule. And this was due to the impervious that's being changed in the Weber Park area. So due to the site size and the proposed disturbance, the applicant is required to meet two parameters of the stormwater rule, the volume and downstream impact parameters. So the volume parameter requires that the project controls for the first 1 inch of runoff over the site's impervious, and they propose to meet that requirement by adding soil amendments in the ball fields and green spaces. And the downstream impacts parameter requires that there's no impacts to the downstream water levels. So the applicant modeled that during the 110 and 100-year storm events, Bedeh-McCoska water levels will not rise, which is in compliance with the rule. So rate control was not a required parameter to be met. However, the city still modeled peak flows at the city of Edina boundary and at the point of discharge to Bedeh-McCoska. And as shown for both of those locations, rates are decreased for the 110 and 100-year storm events. Additionally, although another not required parameter is phosphorus control. And for the project, we still evaluated this because of the interest in the project, and it provides phosphorus control by virtue of providing volume control. So through the soil amendments, they're providing a net reduction in total phosphorus. And further, when you consider the pond expansion and the rerouting of the storm sewer networks, they're also getting a 34-pound reduction of phosphorus in that local area. So these two together provide a water quality improvement in the area. So again, from our review, the project is in compliance with district rules and standards that are applicable. And so while the project meets district rules and provides both water quality and flood mitigation benefits locally, and additionally rates are decreasing downstream and there's no flood stage increase downstream, the pumping overall does send a larger amount of volume downstream than it does in current conditions. And the volume has a secondary effect of increasing phosphorus to Bedeh-McCoska by 8 pounds a year. And that's despite that reduction of 34 pounds out of Weber Pond. And the situation is unusual and not something the district has encountered before. Essentially, because more water is flushing through the pond, there's less time for the particles and nutrients to settle out, which means that they get carried downstream with that water. And although those 8 pounds only represent a 1% increase in the annual watershed load, it's still considered an overall degradation to the lake. So at the March 10th committee meeting, we discussed that in order to mitigate that impact, the district would apply a condition to the permit that would require the city of Edina to address those 8 pounds, either through a unilateral project at the Morningside project, or by working with partners to look downstream for projects that would create a net water quality improvement for Bedeh-McCoska. And this would happen through the signing of a cooperative agreement to address the impact. Since then, the district has continued to meet with the city of Edina, the city of Minneapolis, and the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board to further discuss the cooperative agreement and its structure and the involvement in that agreement. And so that agreement that I mentioned, that can be found in the board packet. And the cooperative agreement details how Edina is going to work with Bar Engineering to perform a feasibility study to address those 8 towns or potentially go beyond that. The feasibility study is going to explore options at the Morningside project for like a potential retrofit solution. And the study to look at that option is going to cost $55,000 and it's going to be solely covered by the city of Edina. In parallel, the study is also going to be looking downstream for projects that provide a net benefit in water quality to Bedema-Cosca. And this portion of the study is projected to cost $68,900. We'd originally proposed that the cost be split equally amongst the 4 parties, Edina, Morningside, the Parks Board, and the district, and that would be about $17,000 each. And after discussions, Edina agreed to provide $17,225, and the Park Board agreed to commit $15,000. Minneapolis has opted to not participate in the cooperative agreement for several reasons, and I'll address those comments later on in the presentation. That leaves a residual $36,675. Staff are recommending that the district enter into an agreement with Edina and the Park Board to bear the remaining cost. By entering into this agreement, we can leverage those partner funds and find solutions that would provide substantial downstream water quality improvements to Bedema-Cosca, which is one of the most recreated lakes in the state. So from here, I'd like to provide a little bit more detail about what the feasibility study actually does. So the feasibility contract is going to be done with Bar Engineering, and all of that information can be found in your board packet. So there are 2 parts of the feasibility study. In the first scope, Bar is going to evaluate retrofit alternatives within Edina at the Morningside project. So these could include amending Weber Pond with iron enhanced sand, adding a filtration system, or altering the pumping system. And then in parallel with the unilateral scope, they'll also look at alternatives downstream at Bedema-Cosca. So that could include a pumped iron enhanced sand filter at the stormwater ponds, the alum dosing of those ponds, or stormwater reuse. So it's proposed that as Bar works through the feasibility study, there's going to be check-in points with the partners. And at those check-ins, we'll review results and further narrow in on the preferred solution. And first and foremost, Bar is going to be focusing on the water quality benefits of the solution, and then follow up with an assessment of a bunch of different criteria like technical function, operations and maintenance, potential funding sources, and permitting needs. So the deadline for completing the feasibility studies would be by September 15th. And after that, the partners would pick a solution and then move toward a secondary cooperative agreement that would focus on implementation. So as I noted earlier, Minneapolis has opted to not participate in the cooperative agreement. Angie Kraft, the director of Minneapolis Surface Water and Sewers Department, submitted comments this afternoon by email that describes their concerns, and those comments will be entered in the public record. So their concerns focus on 2 areas: storm sewer capacity and downstream impacts. So first, they've stated that they're concerned that their storm sewer system may not be able to handle the large amount of volume being pumped downstream in the future. While the district regulations do not speak to this, the district engineer has evaluated this concern by reviewing modeling prepared by the applicant. And what the modeling does, it compares existing and proposed conditions, and then it shows that the existing storm sewer network has the capacity for increased flows, and that downstream residences are not expected to have an increase in flood risk. And then second to that, they also have concerns over downstream impacts, specifically total phosphorus, total suspended solids, and thermal impacts at Bedema-Cosca. Again, although our rules don't speak to these concerns directly, they have been evaluated. Both the total phosphorus and total suspended solids will be addressed through the cooperative agreement, which will be a requirement of permit issuance. And as for the thermal impacts, they're specifically concerned about the temperature and the flow rate of the water flowing downstream and if it could cause any ice safety issues. So we had the district engineer review the submittals prepared by the applicant regarding both of these issues, and we haven't found any items of concern. So the modeling that the applicant prepared looks at water volume and temperature coming from Morningside as it travels to Bedemikoska, and shown that the water is going to cool as it flows downstream. And additionally, it will flow downstream and the temperature is not proposed to change from current conditions. And then the modeling has also shown that the flow is low enough that it's not expected to disrupt the ice formation beyond what already exists under current conditions. President White and Board of Managers, just to sum up what you've heard tonight, the City of Edina is proposing the Morningside project to provide flood risk reduction in the Morningside neighborhood. And the project triggers the district's erosion control, floodplain alteration, and stormwater management rules and is compliance with each of those applicable standards. Further, the project provides a local water quality improvement and flood risk reduction. As for downstream impacts, there's not specific criteria in our rules that address the increase in total phosphorus to Bedemikoska. So staff are recommending that it be addressed through a required cooperative agreement that would be attached to the permit as a condition of permit issuance. It would require Edina to mitigate that 8 pounds or work with partners to go even beyond that. Therefore, staff are recommending that the permit is approved with the following conditions, being submission of erosion and sediment control plan, submission of contractor information, the signing of the cooperative agreement. Then finally, we're also recommending one permit stipulation. So within 60 days of permit issuance, we are requiring Edina to obtain the district administrator's approval of a pumping plan that conforms with the design assumptions in the application and also provide volume monitoring. And then if it's found that the pumping operations increases phosphorus beyond what was modeled, the city will work with the district to modify the pumping operation to mitigate for that. So from here, I will open it up to discussions and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ernst. Is there any member of the public who would like to talk to the board about this permit before we go further? Do any representatives want to speak at this point? Then I would look for a motion to approve the permit with the conditions as outlined in the report by Ms. Ernst, and further to authorize the district administrator to sign the proposed cooperative agreement. Is there a
So
motion?
moved.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Hejmati, second.
Thank you, Manager Hejmati. Now, discussion or questions for Ms. Ernst? Seeing no hands? we
Well,
can
wait a
move
minute.
to a vote. Yes, Manager Maxwell, proceed.
Just, has Edina agreed to all the conditions? I guess before that.
Yes, they have.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Manager Loftus, President White.
Yes.
Thank you. I just had 2 technical questions for Ms. Ernst. On that stipulation that you presented on the last slide, you mentioned a pumping and volume plan or monitoring. I understand that Edina has an interest in knowing what the pumping plan and monitoring is, but is that the district's engineers then reviewing that, or who is capable and interested in reviewing those plans and monitoring the volume?
Thanks, Manager Loftus. Yeah, it's proposed that Stantec will be reviewing that information.
Okay. And then I have a really naive question, and I apologize. Is the stormwater pipe and system at the border of Edina and Minneapolis and going into Minneapolis to the chain of lakes, is that a public system or considered public waters or Minneapolis owned, or is this all just new territory? And so we're trying to partner our way through it because we don't really, it's just such a new concept and a new partnership. I don't know if there's a legal answer to that
Yeah,
that
so
you're aware of.
it's a mix of Edina-owned storm sewers and St. Louis Park and Minneapolis, but they're all used together and have been that way historically. Chris, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add on that from a technical standpoint.
No, Abby, to Manager Loftus's point, it's current city infrastructure. They're city owned and working collaboration in kind of routing the water through the system.
Okay, well, I appreciate Edina's willingness to partner on some of the downstream impacts that are outside of what we've dealt with before. The permit meets our rules. It's just an interesting project, and it also involves obviously other agencies. So I support it. It does meet our rules, and I'm grateful that Edina is willing to work with us on figuring out how to keep long-term impacts figured out. So I support it.
Thank you for your questions, Manager Loftus. Look now to Manager Miller.
This Morningside neighborhood is, as I indicated the last meeting, is very unique. It used to be a separate village, obviously, and Minneapolis provides the water service, and they've always had the storm sewer service. I don't know about the sanitary sewer, whether it leads into Minneapolis system or not, but anyhow, they've had a long-term relationship with the city on this particular neighborhood. And as a resident of Edina, I'm really proud of our of the leadership on our staff and policymakers that are willing to accommodate this regional issue without the normal finger pointing about whose problem it is and addressing it as an environmental problem. And I really appreciate that. I think we should congratulate the city for their willingness to work with us and in the park board on solving this problem.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Other? Very well, then we'll move to voting on the permit with the conditions and stipulation as indicated. Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Hejmati?
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. The permit is approved. And I too add my thanks to our staff and consultants and to the city of Edina and to the other organizations that have collaborated in putting together this solution. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Our next item of business is item 11.1, resolution 22021, and Ms. Brown.
Okay, thank you, President White, managers. Tonight I'm bringing forward a contract with Stantec for the development of specifications and construction oversight for the Wasserman Lake Internal Load Management Project. A little bit of context for this project. This is part of our overall Wasserman Lake restoration strategy. We have been working principally in the Wasserman Lake area in our work in 6 Mile since about 2017 to sort of implement a strategy to delist Wasserman Lake. Through this work, we have managed CARP below the threshold where they damage ecosystems. We've addressed all known high load areas, including the treatment of the pond on the Wasserman Lake Preserve property. So we've managed external sources. We successfully completed the Wasserman Lake Preserve project, which creates a programmed public space that helps tell the story of the restoration of Wasserman Lake. And the last remaining target to improve Wasserman Lake quality is to address lake internal loading. We are in the process of doing so through the Wasserman Internal Load Management Project, our alum treatment of the lake. The goal of this project is to reduce internal loading by 90%, which is approximately 335 pounds per year. In doing so, we expect that it will result in Wasserman Lake meeting state water quality standards. This project has a total budget of approximately $356,000, and it's being funded through a Bowser Clean Water Fund grant, as well as MCWD match. This is the second of 2 treatments on the lake. So we have $208,000 of that grant remaining after the first treatment. This next slide shows the project timeline. Items in red are complete. So we worked through the first round of alum treatment that was applied in the spring of 2021. We also last summer performed efficacy monitoring to observe the response of the lake. The contract that you have before you this evening is to carry forward to the next treatment, where we will be doing some additional sediment analysis, designing and developing the specifications for the treatment, working towards a treatment in the fall of this year to time us up with grant closeout in December of this year. The scope of work for Stantec contains a number of items. We are asking Stantec to manage the collection and analysis of sediment cores on Wasserman Lake. The purpose of this analysis is to be able to be really precise in our recommendations for treatment for the second round. So understand where the alum has been effective, if there are areas that it didn't address internal loading as well as we would have liked. So we can be really precise in the dosing location and amounts as we work towards the second treatment. We're having them revise the specifications to correct over some technical challenges that we had in the first round. We're going to be more specific about the type of equipment and type of monitoring that needs to be done to sort of narrow the contractor pool to those who can be very precise with their application. And then they will also be facilitating the quote process and providing oversight of the application itself. For this work, we are looking at a total cost of $31,000 to be funded through that grant. So with that, the requested action is approval of the contract with Stantec in the amount of $31,000 to develop those specifications and provide construction oversight for this alum treatment on Wasserman Lake.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I would note there's a typographical in the rest. I think it says 21 as opposed to 22, 21. Just a tweak there. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 21?
So moved. Olson.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second, Sando.
Thank you, Manager Sando. Any discussion or any questions for Ms. Brown? Then voting on the resolution, Manager Sando,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Hitchmadi,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye. Manager Olson, you have your hand up.
A quick question for Chris Meehan. When we determine where concentrations have to be greater with the alum in the fall, how is there a general technique? What is the technique we use to say that, you know, those 3 acres need more than those other 8 acres? What, and I don't want a super, you know, detailed report, but what's the general technique of the testing that is done?
Oh, great question, Manager Olson. I'm just smiling because I love to get into the technical stuff. The short answer is we look at how much available phosphorus is through the coring. So when we go out and core within the lake, we identify how much available phosphorus is in that sediment. That then correlates to how much alum you apply to that situation. And so it's kind of like, how much do you need to ensure that phosphorus stays locked in the sediment? And that's how that analysis. So there's a direct correlation of how much phosphorus is available to how much alum you apply.
But we've already got some down there, correct?
Yep.
From last year.
Yep. So then
Yes.
what we'll do is Anna kind of highlighted, the second follow-up is to see how much is still remaining that maybe we need to lock down, and maybe there's areas we don't need to treat as much. Maybe there's areas that we need to get more. As the alum settles through the water column, we want to make sure that what we've got there.
Okay. There's the active word, remaining. Thank you.
Yep.
Now I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have approved or adopted that resolution. So let's move to item 11.2, which is resolution 2222. Again, Ms. Brown, this time about 6 Mile Marsh.
Thank you, President White, managers. So the second item I have for you tonight is the approval of the construction contract for the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie Trail project. As a reminder, as a grounding, this project is a 160-acre prairie restoration that was completed in 2012. This trail was planned from the beginning. However, we decided it would make sense to let the prairie and the restoration work be established before we moved forward with trail construction. So this trail and interpretive project has a budget of $275,400. This is the second time that we have bid the project. It was designed in 2021. We bid the project but opted to reject all bids. So tonight I'm bringing this back to you after our second bid solicitation project, which was successful, but we have several options for how we might award the contract, and I'll be walking you through those this evening. So I'm going to do that by providing a brief design recap, highlighting some of the major elements of the design, giving you an overview of the previous bid results, how we modified the design and adapted to achieve cost savings, results of our second bid process, and then I'll walk us through several options for how we might proceed with construction. So first, just to walk us through the design, this map just grounds us in the location of the prairie up near Halstead Bay, that 210-acre property that we own, 160 acres of which we restored. This map highlights the elements of the bid. It of course includes the construction of a loop trail off of the Dakota Rail Regional Trail. The items that are have the brown circle or brown shape are items that are included in the base bid. So they include 2 entry signs, base material of the transect interpretive feature, They include a seating area by the barn, and I'll provide photos in a moment. And then it also highlights the location of all of the alternates, so the sort of optional elements of the design. So first, as noted, the base bid does include two entry signs. So each entrance off the regional trail, and then the driving entrance off Dakota Regional Trail will have one of these signs. The signs include a location map, some basic facts about the restoration and the property, and then rules for use. The first element, or first interpretive element that's included as a bid alternate is the transect feature. The purpose of this interpretive element is to really highlight the rolling landscape, highlight the varied topography, and create a visual representation of the connection between the landscape and 6 Mile Marsh. This features a base sort of cut into the trail with a concrete slab covered in weathered steel plates that will have some language on them to highlight features of the landscape. And then it also will sort of terminate in a steel plate that frames out the view shed and invites folks to look out across the landscape. I'll note that while the transect is a alternate, the base bid does incorporate some base material, some gravel foundation that cuts across the trail. So regardless of whether the interpretive feature is advanced, the way that the base bid is structured right now will still highlight this location as a view shed. The next interpretive element is the barn. The barn is sort of a natural gathering place on the site. It's where the two entrances sort of merge. It's where the trail will split off into the loop. It's also the only structure on the site, so it's something that people are naturally drawn to, and it has historic significance on the site. The interpretive element proposes to add some signage that is sort of cut into these panels in the side of the barn. And so we're calling them sort of viewing portals where you look through and it will feature some interpretive stories around the site's history, both from a natural resource perspective, as well as from a user perspective, telling some of the stories of site use over time. The next bid alternate is what we call the watershed loungers. So these are creative seating elements that are positioned at a really great view shed point out over 6 Mile Marsh. The purpose is to encourage users to pause, to take in the site, to experience the varied landscape, and just create a good moment for taking in the prairie, the restoration, and its connection to the marsh. These watershed loungers have sort of standalone value, but the plan also proposes to sort of further the storytelling at the site by including this watershed map that will provide additional context for the site in a sub-watershed context. So how the site sits in the full watershed district, and there's some opportunity to use text to tell the story of the land-water connection and features of the prairie and the prairie and watershed context. So those are the 4 interpretive bid alternates. There is also a bid alternate relating to the trail surface that I will come back around to when we look at the 2022 bid results. So first, just a reminder of where we landed in 2021. So we first bid this project in September of 2021. We bid it with a flexible construction schedule. So we gave the sort of option to construct in winter of 21-22 or do it in the spring of 2022, which is the timeline that we're now lining up with for this award. Going into that, we had an opinion of probable cost of $295,000, and we received 2 bids, but both substantially exceeded the opinion of probable cost and the project budget. So we had conversations with the bidders, the design team, the board, and opted to reject the bids and look for some efficiencies in the design before rebidding. Some of the feedback that we heard from the contractors in particular around the higher construction costs were some uncertainty around design complexity and concerns about complexity of the design, a lack of specificity around regulatory and technical requirements, in particular, some concern around the level of testing that would be required. We also observed that the lump sum bid format, where we don't itemize specific costs, can cause bidders to sort of pad their responses more based on uncertainty. And then it was also just bid at a moment where the bid climate was challenging and it was hard to get sort of good responses. So based on that feedback, we made some modifications before rebidding the project. One of the elements was that we created an alternate for the trail material. So we made the base bid a cheaper material, a limestone class 5, and included the granite, which is sort of the higher level of finishing, as an alternate. We simplified some elements of the transect, which was the most expensive of the interpretive elements, and pulled out the site prep for that project. So it was stripped down to just the interpretive component. We made more explicit some of the requirements around permitting and testing. We modified the format to the line item format, where it provides more certainty to the contractor, and tied it to known and standard specifications. And finally, we simply took away the winter solicitation and sort of hoped that the delay would present a better bid climate. And the gamble paid off. We were successful bringing down the bid costs. The 2 contractors that had bid before, Sunram and Parkstone, did bring their costs down from the original bid, though not enough to sort of be in shooting distance of the construction budget. But we saw Urban Company's response pretty well aligned with the design estimate, just a little bit over, about 50,000 over the design estimate overall. One item to note in the response is that Urban Company's initial response had several omissions. They didn't include the list of subcontractors. They didn't include their license number. They had provided a copy of the bid bond rather than original. So we requested those items. We requested that they correct their bid and resubmit. And we worked with legal to make sure that in so doing, they weren't given any advantage and weren't given any opportunity to change their numbers or their contract pricing. So after receiving and reviewing the responses with our design team as well as our attorneys, we do find G Urban Companies to be a responsive and responsible bidder. So like I said, the construction budget is $275,400. So we have some options for how we might award this contract, both sort of an option to stay within construction budget and an option to consider rebudgeting. So I am going to now kind of walk us through. Before I do that, the first sort of cost saving recommendation that I'd like to make to the board is to not proceed with the alternate trail surfacing. So again, that was the switch from the original trail plan was to have the trail surface be granite. We modified it to be class 5 and include the granite as a add alternate. The concept, the benefit was that granite would present a advantage from an operations and maintenance standpoint. And so if we could get it within construction budget, that would be valuable. However, once we received the responses, we worked more with our designer. They spoke to some contractors, and their conclusion is that it really does not present a substantial reduction in O&M frequency because of the topography and undulation of the trail. We can expect to routinely have to bring new material on site and patch the trail with whatever surface we use. And that isn't substantially reduced by going with granite. Using granite may also increase the cost of that routine maintenance. The material is more expensive. The material is a little bit more difficult to acquire. And so from an O&M perspective, it just isn't a substantial benefit. And it also does not present a substantial aesthetic benefit. So as I move forward with the recommendations, we have pulled that alternate from all of the recommendations. We do have the numbers if the board opts to proceed with that one, but it is not one that's included in the recommendations. So that said, we have sort of essentially 3 options for how we might award this contract. The first option is that we can keep this project within the construction budget. We would do this by constructing the base bid and then selecting 2 of 3 of those interpretive nodes. So with either the barn, the loungers, or the watershed map, 2 of 3 of those can keep us within the construction budget. It does eliminate the transect because the transect is substantially more expensive than the other elements. Staff would also make sort of a strong recommendation that the barn interpretive element be one of those options that's included moving forward. It's one of the stronger interpretive features on site. It's a really important element of the site. The barn is somewhere that people will naturally gather, naturally be. Everyone coming into the site will be drawn to it. And so having that enhancement in the barn interpretive element presents a substantial opportunity. And with that option, the construction budget does include contingency. So we'd be looking to use the entire construction budget, but not exceed it. The next option is to proceed with a limited scope of interpretive elements, eliminate the transect based on cost, but include all 3 of the barn, loungers, and watershed map. This would require a minor budget amendment. So in contract costs, it's a $3,315 budget amendment. And then we would also like to put a 5% contingency on that. And then the third option would be to proceed with the trail and all interpretive elements, which would require a budget amendment of approximately $60,000, and then also a 5% contingency on that. So staff's recommendation is to proceed with the award of the base bid and the 3 interpretive nodes, that barn, the loungers, and the map feature, resulting in a total contract cost of $278,000 and a 5% contingency. As noted, this would require a small budget amendment, and we would propose to use funds from the Meadowbrook Golf Course Capital Fund, since it's not going to be used this year, and then we can levy for it in the next year, sort of pay ourselves back. We also recommend that the board have further discussion about the transect and its the cost benefit of proceeding with the transect option. On the one hand, it is a really strong interpretive element. It's very creative, it's unique, it tells a strong story about the land-water connection and the change in the landscape. On the other hand, it's substantially more expensive than the other options, and it's more than twice what our construction cost estimate was. So there's a case to be made either way, and I think the board can discuss the value of including that. That said, if the board's desire is to keep it to the construction budget only, our recommendation in that case would be to proceed with the barn and the lounger feature. And this is aligned with the designer's recommendation as well. And that would have a total contract cost of $268,000, and leaves a small amount of contingency. Not as much contingency as we typically would work with, but I am comfortable that there isn't a lot of uncertainty in this project and that we can make it work with that small contingency. So I know that that is a lot of options, a lot of things to consider. I've developed sort of a recommended discussion sequence to help work through this question. I think that the first question is to decide whether you do agree with the recommendation that we proceed with the base bid and those 3 interpretive nodes, understanding that that would require a minor budget amendment. If the board does not want to amend the budget, would like to keep us within construction budget, then the question would be whether you agree with our recommendation regarding the barn and lounger. And if you do agree with that recommendation, we can have further discussion around the inclusion of the transect interpretive feature. So we'll start with question 1, maybe, and I can put, we have some pictures for reference if that's helpful, and then I can also leave us on the budget slide, whatever folks need to reference.
You restate question 1, Anna, and then President White, Manager Loftus has her hand up.
Yeah, so question 1 is, do you concur with the recommendation?
I want to do this differently a little bit. I'd like to have a motion on the table before we proceed. So my suggestion is that we have a motion to take the base +3 with the minor amendment. That'd be my suggestion. And then we can talk about it. I'd like to make the discussion follow into, and you can lead that discussion primarily, Ms. Brown, but have it fall into chunks so we kind of keep it tight. And then we can always move to amend at the end for whatever the board consensus seems to be. So could I have a motion to adopt the resolution as the base bid +3?
Move.
Second.
Sorry, Manager Olson moved, Manager Miller seconded?
Correct.
Okay, now Ms. Brown, I'll return it back to you.
I think Manager Loftus, you had a question or input.
Manager Loftus.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Great presentation as always. Thank you. I had a question. I'm trying to compare the loungers on the map, and I'm not sure what scaling the map back looks like, but in my opinion, having a map connecting that area to the full watershed is appealing. And looking at the loungers, I understand perhaps the appeal is a different perspective, but it seems to me that people would be sitting and kind of having a view up towards the sky. I'm not quite sure how that completely aligns with our watershed goals, but looking to you to maybe spell out the benefits a little more on those loungers beyond a place to sit and a perspective. I think the map is more appealing to me and kind of connecting that prairie to the rest of the district. And then I can certainly understand the staff's recommendation on the barn interpretive elements and appreciate that perspective. And then you mentioned in the presentation that the transect, a big part of the base of it, will still serve as a view shed. So I concur with staff's recommendation on that to have that serve as a invitation to look at the view shed and not move forward with those interpretive elements. But back to my question, I guess, is comparing the loungers versus the map. The map, I see how it fits into our goals and our regional kind of education, and curious how those loungers serve kind of more of a purpose than just a place to sit.
Certainly, and Manager Loftus, I'll agree that it's a hard decision between those two. I think that they both offer benefit. In talking with the designers and sort of reviewing the intent, their thought, and I would tend to agree, is that the loungers just sort of have the added benefit of encouraging people to stop, to pause, and to experience it, versus the map, which I agree it's really important that we make the case and tell the story of the connection between the site and the watershed. I think that some of that is accomplished on the entry signs. We do have maps there. We have text to tell some of that story. And so the advantage is that you are sort of adding this element that's a little bit more experiential by including the loungers. And then on the angle there, so there's actually two loungers out there. One is positioned a little bit more upright, and that one is sort of pushing your view more towards the prairie and the marsh. The one that is a little bit more reclining, the intent was that it was a little bit more sky focused and a little bit more sort of experiencing the vastness of the open sky and even presenting an opportunity to view stars. And so that's sort of the intent of it. It's hard between those two. I think that they're very complementary. But when we sort of had to think hard and make the hard decision with the designer, that the lounger is sort of where we came down as that recommendation. I wanted to note too, on the base being included in the transect, I do think that if we proceed with not going with the transect, I think that there's probably some conversation to happen around including the base or not, and whether we want to create, maybe put a bench if we are including the base, so it isn't just kind of an extended gravel path. But I would say, sort of depending on the recommendation, we might go back and look at that, but any change to the design would come back to the board.
I know you have your hand up, Manager Miller. I'll come to you shortly, but you enabled your video, Mr. Heyman. Did you want to speak to this point? No, okay. Manager Miller.
Am I on? Yeah. I got several observations. How much should we, James, how much should we spend on this, these 2 farms we bought?
That's a question only the current project manager should know. It would
I
have
think it's
been,
like 3.8 million.
it would have been, yeah, over 2.5 million for the Halverson and Dimmler. So I will track that down and get you a precise number.
Well, the reason I asked that is, you know, we've got a lot of money invested in it, and now and then the acquisition and the restoration and the demolition. I don't think it's a good idea to cut short our ambition for the project. We should go full hog on the deal. It's not ridiculously more expensive. It's somewhat, but I think it's worthwhile. That would be my preference. Number 2, I think you may have age and ADA problems with those hammocks, because I'm not sure I could get out of them once I got in them. And say nothing of handicapped people. So I think we should give that a little bit more thought, because it'd be fine for the teenagers, but I don't know who else would sit in them. And the final thing I'd like to point out is I go out there about once a year, because we've had the property for a long time, and I can never find the damn thing. You know, it takes me a couple wrong turns before I find it, because it isn't accessible off the state highway or even the county road. It's so what I would like to do is see if we can get Medina to permit some Pathfinder signs from St. Boniface to the site, because I think there's going to be a lot of people just driving out there, and it's because it's such a pleasant place to walk and these beautiful views and everything. That a lot of people will be driving there and parking in the parking lot if they could ever find it. But otherwise, it should be limited to people, some of the people that may stop on their bikes when they're on the trail. But you're going to miss a whole bunch of patrons if you don't provide Pathfinder for the people that are driving out there. That's all I got to say about that.
I agree that it's hard to find. I've looked at the map every time. Manager Olson.
Thank you. I would be more inclined to rest and relax on just a plain old standard park bench. The idea of putting a lounger / bed out there seems a bit strange. If not that I'm going to age myself here, but when Laura Ingalls Wilder was out in the prairie, she laid on the ground, you know, and looked at the stars. So when I grew up, we had picnics with blankets, and so there's all kinds of simplicity that's part of that prairie. I don't know that we need hammocks, and but a park bench might be nice for sitting, and we can discuss that. But whatever we decide, I too would like to finish it with this contractor. I every time we come back and add something later, it tends to be a little more expensive. And I think I'd be willing to get it all in there and get it done right, so that the folks in Minnetrista and St. Bonnie have a finished product that was thought out.
Manager Maxwell.
Just a couple quick ones, and I agree with Bill and Dick on the lounges. I think, first of all, what are the lounges made out of? You know, is it rope or is it metal? But I think benches would probably be more beneficial in the long run. But the other part is this: are we comfortable with this developer, because he didn't turn in all his paperwork to begin with? And if we use this developer before, or we don't get down the road and all of a sudden.
Manager Maxwell, they have bid on projects before. we have not awarded to them. A client that they have worked for a lot is the, I'm sorry, I'm blanking the St. Paul, the county that St. Paul is in.
Ramsey.
Ramsey, sorry, the Rams, they've done a lot of work for the Ramsey County Parks and Recreation Department. I spoke with their director, and they had glowing reviews. I mean, one of our concerns was they are so much lower. Are we going to see a lot of change orders? And he relayed that they've never seen sort of unexpected changes or change orders. So after talking with him, I did feel confident that that they could deliver.
Okay, that helps a lot, because you said there was missing a lot of paperwork and some other stuff to begin with, and I was gonna wonder if, you know, it's because there is about $100,000 difference in the bids, so.
Mhm.
But I agree, if we're gonna do it, we should probably spend the money and just get it done completely, but I have some concerns about lounges instead of benches and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Manager Hajmati.
Yes. I'm hoping that this really beautiful place that has been created by us, you know, bringing back nature the way it was, is something that school kids can go to and really enjoy, and you know, have an appreciation. Living in cities, have an appreciation for nature and what nature is. And so I would really like, just like you know, several of the other managers are saying, let's go whole hog and let's have interpretive features that that can be used on school excursions, where kids can come and look at them and understand and absorb it and have an appreciation, you know, for nature. You know, people protect what they love, and if they learn to love the land, then they will protect it in the future. So I would also, along with the other managers, say, let's do it all. As far as the bench is concerned, I'll go along with the majority, whatever they choose, bench or you know, or lounger. Either way, I'll go with whatever folks decide.
President White, could I respond quickly to the conversation around the loungers? Thank you. I hear that feedback. I think it's important feedback. You know, we did approve them as part of the final design and bid the projects to include them. So at this point, if we wanted to modify the design, it would probably have to happen through working with the designer and coming back with a potential change order. That is doable, but from an award standpoint, I think, and maybe Mike will jump in if I'm wrong, I think it would make sense to still approve the recommendation regarding the 3 interpretive nodes, and you can direct staff to work with the designer and the contractor and see if we can come up with an alternative proposal for that seating area and make a decision down the road. And so I think that I'm hearing we can maybe make a decision on the first question and then maybe pivot to talk about the transect, but I'll take your lead, President White, on that piece.
Miller.
Following up on Ron's comment about kids, the Gale farm is real close to this, isn't it? Isn't it the Gale farm? It's a Three Rivers Park working farm, pretty much. So this would be a kind of a supplement to a school outing. You know, witnessing a farm experience versus you know, a prairie and restoration previous to farming the area. So I think it could be well used if it's marketed the right way with those people that use the Gale Farm for outings, which I'm sure is a lot of kids get bussed out there every year.
Thank you. Mr. Heyman.
Thanks, President White, managers. The way Anna described it, I think is correct. If there's, in terms of the ease of managing the construction contract and the way we could most efficiently still move the project forward under the current contract and satisfy the desire to look at additional seating options, it would make sense to approve the bid with that alternate and direct staff to explore additional seating options. I'm confident that standard bench, or I mean, it wouldn't be a cast in place concrete or something that's going to require significant construction effort. A standard bench or other seating option should fit within the allotted budget, and we could then, work through a change order process with the contractor. So we'd still be able to move the effort forward. Could be back in front of the board with options once we have a conversation with the designer. And so to Anna's point, I think the moving those elements forward together would still work within the present budget.
Thank you. Manager Loftus, you had your hand up.
I did, and then I took it down. I mean, I'm hesitant to say it. It seems like this project is quite over-designed, in my opinion. You shouldn't have to talk to a designer to add a bench. They're for sale. You install them. And I think the feedback maybe we can take from some of our bidders is the complexity. And when you design creatively, which is great, but also maybe looking at some standardized specs as far as signage and trails. If we're doing this at more than one place, like we did at Wasserman and here, I mean, there's no reason we need to start from scratch every time, in my opinion, anyway. I guess I've maybe worked on a park system where things are more standardized, and I get it, you want to get the most out of each site, but some of it seems to be maybe overly complex. I think it shouldn't be hard to change out loungers for benches, and I don't know that you need a designer to help you do that, but I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. But I think if you already have the base on that transect, instead of putting those interpretive elements in, you put a bench in there and you switch out the loungers for benches, you're probably in the ballpark financially. So I guess I'd support that as kind of the simple way to move forward, whether you don't go forward with the loungers as a bid option, since you don't plan to put them in, just don't select them as a bid option and add a bench later. Or I don't know. I'm not sure why it's, I'm not trying to make it more complicated, which is why I put my hand up. But that's just a general comment, not a question of maybe next time we maybe simplify a little bit.
Manager Loftus, I think I appreciate that feedback. I think you're right. Part of my reason for saying that we would still include it in the bid is to have some flexibility on budget as we figure out kind of what the alternative seating option is. We don't exactly know, if we pull the base material from the transect, we don't know what the cost savings there are. They're probably pretty small. It's just sort of a material cost. But there, there's other ways to achieve that. We could increase the contingency. Maybe we're getting complicated again. It's just, it's a little tough to sort of make the changes on the fly. And so approving that with the direction to look at other options just sort of gives us the flexibility, and we'll come back to the board with whatever the recommendation is.
Anna, this is Bill with a quick question. As you travel on the road that is on the north side of the property, there's a dirt road that leads straight south to the barn. Is that intended for people to actually use with their vehicles to gain access?
No, Manager Olson, the vehicle parking will be on Halstead Drive. And that'll be a walk-in. So the road will be there, but as a walk-in.
Halstead Drive is that east-west road on the north side of the property. And so people will just park on the shoulder there.
Yeah, we have sort of a pull-out area that is sort of improved for parking. So that'll be maintained.
Thank you.
There are questions from managers? My comment is that we had some of these same discussions when we were approving the design in the first place, and we're sort of rehashing some of that. And we did send the proposal or the request out with certain requirements, and so we really need to decide that we can't just amend it as we sit here. It already went out. But I'd like to have someone try to summarize, or maybe I will try to summarize where I think we are. The motion was to proceed with the base bid and 3 interpretive notes and a minor budget amendment. So do we want to, that would be everything but the transect? Was that how we did that? Okay.
Correct.
So just as a kind of a straw poll, how many of our members who would like to see that transect added with the features described? I like it, but it sounds like a minority.
I would like to have the transect. This is a room.
Thank you.
Gene
That's
likes
what
the
I-
concept.
No,
I would too.
Sure.
Sorry, Jean, you want it also?
Yeah,
Manager Manager Miller, what'd you say?
Yes,
Mhm. So that's a majority. That's like 4, I think we just said that. And is there a general comfort with the idea of approving this and then, but directing staff to explore a possible change order involving, what would it mean to have the benches instead of the lounger, for example?
I'm comfortable with that.
I missed the question.
Would we be comfortable approving this, but then directing staff to have some further conversations regarding possibly using benches instead of lounger, or what the change would be, what the cost would be?
Yes.
So if we're going to go that direction, what I would need, I think, is a motion to amend to add the transect and to, in addition to approving the bids we have, to direct staff to explore some possible changes.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
It's my
Second.
second.
Oh,
Any further discussion before we vote on the amendment? Then voting on the amendment, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson, Manager Sando, Manager Loftus,
Nay.
Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
aye.
Manager Sando, and I will vote aye. That is 6-0 to the amendment. Now voting on the amended, the original motion as amended. Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Nay.
Manager Sando, Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Thank you. The resolution is adopted, and thank you all for the great presentation and for the discussion we've had. Then our next item is Resolution 2223 regarding Blake Road. Mr. Heyman.
Before we get on to that,
Yes.
the board had several years ago requested that a fence be put up around the barn. And it was put up. And now it's down. And I don't remember board action authorizing it to come down.
I don't remember it going up, but look to staff. What's the status?
Manager Miller, managers, I don't believe there being a fence authorized to go up, although there was certain security conditions that were put in place, including permanent sealing of the barn and locking of the barn with padlocks, but I don't recall there ever being a fence that was installed around the.
It was a
around-
cyclone, a 8-foot high cyclone fence around the whole barn. And it was protected from break-ins until we decided what we were gonna do with it. Because we saved the barn at the request of Minnetrista city government. But I was just wondering how it was a board action, I remember that. To fence it in, and then it was fenced in for a period of time, and then it came down. I don't know.
Manager Miller, President White, managers. My memory is similar to Mike's. If it was put up, it may have been temporary because we did have some issues with vandalism until the board may have decided to then move forward with permanent sealing and locking of the barn. But I think what we'll do is, instead of speculating, I'll talk with Tiffany and we'll just track down the original board resolutions, and I can report back at the next meeting on that specific chronology of in what years, what resolution, and just the chain of events that unfolded.
Good, thank you.
Now, what I remember most is environmental remediation, taking out the guano from the generations of pigeons that were in the barn. So.
Well, the construction may have required it to come down when they were doing the contours and stuff. I don't know, but I don't remember. I remember a board action putting it up, but not requesting it to come down. But
Then going to 325 Blake Road, Mr. Heyman.
Madam President,
Mr. Smith, yes.
I wanted to be clear for the record, the vote on the amendment was 5-1-1 with Manager Loftus opposed and Manager Sando not voting, and the same on the main motion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Recollection.
Good evening, Madam Chair, managers. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
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 Well, we're before you this evening with Resolution 22-023, seeking approval of the 325 Blake Road purchase and sale agreement with the Lattice Development LLC. We were before the board to discuss the high-level components of the purchase and sale agreement at its March 24th meeting, and are now prepared to execute the document based on that feedback and our continued work with the developer. Our real estate attorney, Alex Selke, who's the lead author of the purchase and sale agreement, he's with us this evening and can certainly answer any detailed questions the board may have if I don't answer them in my presentation. Since we did provide a development update at the March 24th meeting, and the board was provided with the full purchase and sale agreement for review in advance of the meeting, I'm going to walk through the document at a high level, and then we'll open the floor for any questions that managers may have of myself or Mr. Selke. So we'll start with just a brief reminder of what the master development plan is, what has been approved at the city, the key considerations that were detailed through the selection of a Lattice as our development partner. I'll then walk through the structure of the purchase and sale agreement, mainly highlighting the key conditions and a couple of the exhibits, and finally close with next steps. So the board will recall that in November, it approved the preliminary concept that you see before you, and specifically the stormwater cascade and its connection to the district project. At that time, the approval noted that the design presently meets the intent when it selected a Lattice as the development partner, and recognized that the concept is going to continue to be refined through additional design efforts in 2022. This master plan forms the basis for the exhibits outlined in the purchase and sale agreement, and is really the key land use entitlement image for the project. The board will also recall that there were 4 key considerations agreed to by the partners as the joint board and council unanimously selected a Lattice. These conditions, in partnership with that master development plan that I just showed you, create the foundation of the purchase and sale agreement in total. To detail the considerations as they were carried into the agreement, it was first agreed to that the purchase price would be $11.25 million over 2 phases, an $8 million and a $3.25 million phase, and the city council did not support the developer using purchase price as a subsidy to close any potential gaps. Secondly, the city would not further look to the district for additional financial risk, and the city would accept any risk associated with financial gaps using tax increment financing, grants, or other subsidy mechanisms to help deliver the project vision set forth with the Lattice. The third element was the operation and maintenance responsibilities for the site overall, and that they'd be shared between the city, the developer, and the district, with the district's responsibility focused on its parcel and the water management features that we construct. And lastly, the joint liaison group would remain engaged throughout the process to assure mutually successful completion of the process and project delivery. So using these key considerations and the master development plan, the district and our real estate council set out to develop the purchase and sale agreement in a way that would capture the intent of the deal while assuring both parties that their collective expectations for the site would be delivered, that the greenway amenities that the development depends upon, the district's portion of the project, would be delivered, and that the regional stormwater offset improvements that the district requires are delivered in order to position the development as it's planned. I'll be frank, and my apologies to Alex, as he may disagree, but there's really no exciting way to work through a nearly 50-page purchase and sale agreement. So this evening, I'll touch on the high points of the key sections of the document, and then we can answer any detailed questions that the board might have, or if I miss any of the key conditions. So the outline in front of you references the sections that we'll tick through briefly, and they go in order of the agreement, so you can scroll along on your copy of the document to see the particular language if that's of interest to you. So first in the agreement, you'll see we have the recitals. This really sets the stage for the agreement. It details the most important aspects of what the parties aim to achieve and creates the terminology for the remainder of the document. So it details that the district owns real property in Hopkins and is willing to sell the site in 2 phases of particular acreage, so long as the buyer is implementing the master development plan that was approved by the city. That plan requires certain stormwater management and treatment improvements within the developable acreage because of the impact to the district's regional stormwater system. This is known as the stormwater offset improvements, stormwater design objective, and stormwater design core elements that are referenced throughout the document. It also notes that the district will continue to own and improve the remainder of the site, which is known as the watershed project and watershed project design core elements. And finally, that Alatus as the buyer is capable of delivering the project as proposed. So in sections 1 and 2, then we get into we detail the purchase price, as noted previously, of $11.25 million over 2 phases, $8 million for phase 1 and $3.25 million for phase 2. It also details earnest money conditions and shared costs of title work through the deal. So sections 3 and 4 are a little bit more detailed as it relates to the buyer and seller's conditions. Section 3 details the feasibility period, which is commonly described as the due diligence period, and it also describes the buyer's conditions to close. The feasibility period is a relatively standard 1 year from the effective date of the agreement. The language details the buyer's efforts to review the property, confirm that it meets its needs for building, that the buyer reviews the district's project to ensure that we don't materially change our greenway and regional stormwater efforts, as the master plan is predicated on specific investments of the district. The buyer can extend the feasibility period twice for 90 days each time. Each time is a cost of $25,000 per extension, and those are non-refundable and do not apply towards the purchase of the property. And lastly, the watershed readiness condition and the buyer's phase 2 conditions detail the good faith efforts and construction efforts the watershed district must provide to assure Alatus that our project will proceed as designed. Similarly, in section 4, you'll see conditions to closing that mirror some of that language. This is really the portion of the document that provides multiple assurances that the development project will be delivered in a manner that is satisfactory for the district to close on the site, and that the development meets the project goals from a water management standpoint. So the conditions to close from the seller's perspective, from the district's perspective, is that we provide written approval from the watershed district that the stormwater offset improvement area and its connection to the regional stormwater project meets the scope, scale, and investment as set forth in the purchase agreement. The parcel must have an approved plat, final plat, in order to close. Conditions to close also note that before expiration of the feasibility period, we must have an approved reciprocal easement and operating agreement. That's the REOA that you hear referenced every so often. That must be recorded against the property as applicable to deliver the stormwater project. It also notes that prior to closing on phase 1, the buyer must demonstrate all project approvals to obtain permits and secure financing for construction of at least $25 million in development and construction of the public right-of-way improvements. I'll also note in section 4, it does lay out the conditions for closing on phase 2, and those are that the buyer must have commenced construction on at least 2 buildings. They shall have obtained approval and permits and demonstrate financing to commence at least $75 million in construction on phase 2, and should have substantially completed both the public right-of-way work and the stormwater offset improvement. So those are conditions that are necessary to for a phase 2 takedown, meaning that substantial completion has occurred on a significant portion of the phase 1 site, including the right-of-way and the stormwater improvements. Lastly, in the conditions to close section, there is a detailed section regarding the stormwater offset readiness condition. This is the section that details how the buyer must demonstrate its ability to construct the stormwater area in accordance with design requirements. And so this language requires Lattice to have entered design and construction agreements to build the stormwater offset improvements, to have obtained necessary permits to construct the offset improvements promptly following the phase 1 closing, that there shall be no material change to the design of the offset, and the buyer must reasonably demonstrate funding or financing to perform its obligations. So collectively, these are what are known as the stormwater offset readiness conditions. And if these conditions have not been met, the seller, the district, can exercise a termination warning notice to trigger a 60-day period for the buyer to satisfy those requirements. Into section 5, that covers general due diligence elements such as existing property document inspections, rights of inspection, insurance, and indemnification. Section 6 details project development components. Most importantly, for the district, this frames up the requirements of that REOA, the reciprocal easement and operating agreement, which will require the buyer to maintain the stormwater offset area. It will provide the district with a perpetual easement over said stormwater area. It will provide construction easements to both parties in order to complete the collective work, and will otherwise detail additional access and maintenance obligations of the parties. Section 6 also describes the potential need for a site development agreement if the parties attempt to construct certain components of the project in a shared manner. And lastly, describes our collective efforts to obtain outside funding to assist with the stormwater improvements as available. That includes our efforts around the Public Facilities Authority application that is presently in the certification process. Finally, section 7 details the anticipated closing schedule for the takedown. Notably, phase 1 will occur approximately within the year. We have heard from the buyer that progress to date will likely mean a waiver of the full feasibility period in order to close before the year is up. That's to be seen once we execute the purchase and sale agreement. It also details that phase 2 should occur no later than December 31st, 2024. And lastly, I'll note sections 8 through 18 are general purchase and sale agreement terms and conditions, and Alex can certainly speak to those in more detail if there are questions. So to refresh the board quickly, as it relates to the plat and the phases for takedown, outlots A and B include the district-owned portion of the property and equate to about 4.12 acres of project land and an additional 0.53 acres of creek, since the center line of the creek delineates the property boundary on the site. Phase 1 is to be taken down for that $8 million and includes the area delineated in green. It's a total acreage of 8.52 acres developable and 1.3 acres for the public right-of-way that will be turned over to the city. And then phase 2 is to be taken down for $3.25 million and is about 2.93 acres and includes those areas in orange. So noting that in The exhibits in the purchase and sale agreement are very detailed. In particular, the exhibits related to the stormwater offset improvement area and the required components to ensure the district's regional project is not adversely impacted and in fact is actually enhanced and improved. Exhibits B and C detail the stormwater system, the treatment process, and the landscape improvements, as well as other amenities that will be built as part of the overall improvement. And so as you'll see in those exhibits, and I'm not putting all of them on the screen this evening, some of them are quite detailed and are large images and maps. It does lay out the entire stormwater system that's being constructed up in the development area. It lays out the stepwise process for treatment of the water that is being pumped from the regional stormwater system due to the buildings being constructed within the footprint of the regional system. It also details from a landscape perspective the retaining walls that are required and included as part of the offset area in order to stabilize the regional system and create the edge that the commercial and building D pose on that portion of the Greenway and regional stormwater facility. So should the board approve the purchase and sale agreement this evening, the teams will immediately shift our focus to the various documents that are needed in order to close on phase one of the site. We know that the developer has a desired close date yet this year, which will be dependent on satisfying the conditions that we've walked through tonight. We will immediately pivot efforts to develop those documents such as the REOA and site development agreements once the purchase and sale agreement is approved. As you know, we are moving very quickly towards 90% design in an effort to begin construction activities on the site yet this year. We do anticipate 90% design approval in June and certification of the project through the Public Facilities Authority in June as well, if that's a successful grant application. We then anticipate phase one would close later in the summer or fall, and finally initiate the bid process for the district's work and commence phase one construction later fall or early winter. And before I move to a final resolution, I believe Lewis Smith may have a comment for the board or may have additional direction for us before taking action.
Thank you. Madam President, Board of Managers, I just want to note, obviously you've got a very thorough presentation here and you've had a great deal of time to consider this. It is a complex agreement. If there are issues that you do wish to discuss with Mr. Selke and staff, this still would be appropriate for the board to go into closed session if it wishes. Because it relates to the development of these terms for the sale of the property. But ultimately your vote to approve the agreement should be an open session. So I just want to reserve that option for the board, depending on any questions or discussion you may wish to have.
Thank you. Are there managers who would like to discuss in more detail and go into closed session? Manager Loftus?
Thank you, President White. I don't have a detailed question, but just a general question for both Lewis and Mike. Wanted to know whether there were any issues or sticking points in the agreement that either didn't get resolved or didn't get resolved to a point of where you think it meets our goals or intentions. I'm sure you wouldn't put it in front of us if you didn't support what is there, but just wanted for my own peace of mind to check in and make sure.
Madam President, that would be an example of a question that you would go into closed session to discuss.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I have a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Manager Hishmali, may I have a second?
Miller seconds.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Voting to go into closed session, Manager Sando? Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Hishmati?
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. We are now in closed session. Are there any further questions? Then I'd like a motion to go out of closed session.
So moved, Hajmari.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Loftus.
Thank you, Manager Loftus. Then voting on that, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Sando, Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Hajmati,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye as well. Back then into open session with the resolution before us. Is there a motion to, I didn't do this before, is there a motion to adopt the resolution which will approve the purchase and sale agreement and authorize execution?
Could we give that honor to Gene Maxwell?
Oh, no. Well, thank you. To make the resolution 2020-023.
Second.
Motion to adopt. A second, Manager Miller. Any further discussion? Then this is just really quite a landmark.
Yes, it
Voting
is.
on adopting the resolution. Manager Hajmati,
Aye.
Manager Miller, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Sando, Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye. This is, it's so exciting to, you know, we made this more difficult by partnering, but we're going to get all the, you know, we're moving toward getting those extra benefits that we wouldn't have gotten if we hadn't taken this route. So it's really, really pleasing to be a hit this place. Everyone for looking.
And I really want to, like Manager Miller said, I want to congratulate everyone that on the amount of sort of diligence that has been and care in not only preparing the documentation, but keeping us informed so that the discussion we had today was relatively limited. It was, you know, it was easy to get through it. Just really great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The last item we have tonight is the administrator's report. Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, President White and managers. Very brief report for you this evening. Just on the staffing front, as you know, we've had some turnover recently and have some vacant positions that we're filling. We have 3 permanent hires that are being made, and you'll get a report on that probably at the next meeting or 2 in more detail once staff start and they're introduced. But we've made 3 offers that have been accepted and 3 permanent staff that will be joining us all on the same day, May 2nd. So we'll have a cohort starting in the permanent team. Helen's busy interviewing her 2 outreach positions, and those are going to carry through a second round of interviews next week. And Mike's first round of interviews for the planner project manager start next week. I think you're relatively up to speed on all the other happenings, from 325 to Boardwalk to Nokomis to all the connection points that we've been having with partners, Morningside, and everything else. So I'll keep it brief and just see if there's any questions around things that we're working on.
The ice is out on Lake Minnetonka. Do you know what the elevation is, and if we might ever get to?
Well, now you're quizzing me. I should have asked her questions. 928.
928. Okay.
Is that a good guess or was that accurate?
It's extremely precise.
Any other questions? Real questions, not mine, for Mr. Whisker. Then we are.
It looks
adjourned.
high, President White.
I'm sorry, what? It looks
The
high.
lake
is
looks
it?
a little high.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, happy Easter, everyone.
Hope everyone enjoys Easter.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Here.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Take care.
Good night.